praying. Bless the members of this chamber, all who assist their work as representatives of the people. We begin with prayer to acknowledge our dependence on you as our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. So may the strength of God pilot us, may the power of God preserve us, may the wisdom of God instruct us, may the hand of God protect us, may the way of God direct us, may the shield of God defend us. And so, Lord God, what we know not, teach us, what we have not, give us, what we are not, make us, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. To the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
On. Good morning, members. I'm happy to see so many of you here today. I'm sure you had an enjoyable crop over activity. It's a good sign. Minutes. Minutes of, I don't see them myself. This is minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 23rd of July. 2019.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be taken as read.
Second, seconder. Question is that those minutes be taken as read. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Announcements by Your Honor the Deputy Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 16, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Second, please.
Question is that those standing orders so mentioned be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 8, sir. In the name of the Honourable Minister of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, to resume the debate on the second reading of the Data Protection Bill 2019.
Honourable Member for St. George for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise this morning to make my contribution to this debate on the Data Protection Bill, a debate which is of great significance to the country in general, but I say particularly so for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, which I have the honor to lead. It is a debate that is very timely in the sense that as this government proceeds with its quest to move to e-government, e-cabinet, and the whole process of the digitization of our records, this certainly is of great significance. How do we treat to the handling of records, personal information, and the safeguards that we institute in order to satisfy the persons whose information resides with us? I would like to begin, first of all, by complimenting the Honourable Minister from the other place and the Member of Parliament for St. George South and the other members of the Select Committee for doing a fantastic job in bringing us to this point where we have a document before us that is comprehensive, a document that I believe once we are able to pass in this House today will go a long way towards dealing with the issues and the vulnerabilities associated with data protection. We are living in a time, I'm sure you would agree, where technological developments are moving at such a pace that in the field of electronic data processing, I believe that these developments have radicalized the way in which we have conventionally been able to collect, to store, to share, and disseminate information. And because of these technological developments, there are some vulnerabilities that are inherent in the process and some areas that we need to address in order to be able to deal with new and emerging threats. And this debate, this bill, seeks to do just that. The bill is very, very important because it impacts on several ministries that are represented in this honourable chamber. It impacts on several sectors within our society, and consequently, it impacts on the lives of tens of thousands of Barbadians and of persons residing here, and I dare say certainly from the immigration perspective of persons who transit our shores. So it is a very, very important debate that we are having today. I think that I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that medical records constitute special categories of personal data. And this is a point that I think is worthy of note. In this technological revolution that we are experiencing, I equate the question of records of data with that, for example, of nuclear science, nuclear energy, something that is intended for good. But if it falls in the hands of those who would want to do people harm, then it becomes a weapon of mass destruction. And although data or data protection is not considered in those terms, the misuse of data, the misuse of information, personal information, by persons who should not have access to that information would have irreversible consequences, because we are dealing now with personal data, things that are sensitive to the individual. And that makes it a very, very significant thing in my estimation. And that is why, following the debate and by other members in this honourable chamber, I agree with a number of things that have been said, including the honourable member for St. Michael West, the honourable leader of the opposition, who generally supported the bill, but there was one statement made by the honourable member for St. Michael West that I did not agree with, and that is he was speaking in relation to the penalties that were listed in the document. And he was thinking and equating those penalties with other things that we are seeking to do as a government in terms of decriminalizing certain aspects of what have become part of our landscape. But when you're dealing with personal data, when you're dealing with things like medical records and things that are sensitive to people, then I believe that the level of accountability has to be higher. And especially in dealing with patient records, medical records, I would even say higher than the norm. Because if that information is compromised and if we do not maintain the confidence of the public that we are trying to serve, then it brings our health care system to a grinding halt. We are operating a system that is dependent on persons to be able to feel that the information that is taken by professionals within the healthcare sector, for example, that information will be treated in a most confidential manner. And so that is why I say that, in my view, we need to be able to put things in place to deal with issues where persons give away information that they ought not to give away, or where persons have not been acting in a professional and confidential manner. So that the security of health records, medical records, must be placed at the top of the priority list when we're dealing with information, with data. And this is something that we would want to look at. But coming closer to home in terms of health care, this bill, this data protection bill, is important because it is directly connected to the way patient information in this country is captured, stored, and shared between entities. And let me explain that. Our health system in this country has been, to a large extent, based on primary health care, with the addition of secondary and tertiary health care. Primary health care, we're talking about community health care, the polyclinics, community clinics. And we have a system that has 9 polyclinics stretched across the length and breadth of this country, and 3 community clinics located in St. Andrew, St. Thomas, and St. Joseph. And that system is based on the fact that persons recognize that it's not the same as going to the private system, to private doctors and so forth, in the sense that when you go to a polyclinic, you know very well that you will not necessarily meet the same doctor on each occasion. In other words, you will meet the doctor who is scheduled to work for that particular day. So obviously that information has to be shared. You also understand that if perchance you had to go to another polyclinic, that the information obviously would have to be shared. And in fact, our system really has come about as a result of the fact that we have been doing things manually, manual records for decades. And so it would have been difficult for you to go from one polyclinic to the next because your records would not be following you. And so that is why the catchment area came into being, and people were then tied down to particular polyclinics. But that has changed. That has changed with the advent of the health information system and the fact that we now have the entire primary sector digitized. And that is what made it easier when we had issues recently with the Randall Phillip Polyclinic for persons and various clinics to be able to send to St. John and to Winston Scott and to Edgar Cochrane. It is because records became portable, portability based on digitization. And that came about a few years ago. I'm very happy that it is up and running properly, and it is based on the premise that personal information, would be treated with a large degree of confidentiality. Then you also have the situation where within the hospital system, people move from psychiatric to QAH, and from QAH to geriatric, and so on. So there must automatically be a sharing of information. But even within that system, the information or access to information is not done on a willy-nilly basis. There are persons who have access to some information and some who have access to more than the others. For example, because of the stigmatization that is associated with HIV/AIDS and mental health clinics, that information is not accessible by those working in the general polyclinic system. That is for those who are within the mental health sector. And in terms of HIV/AIDS, those at the Lady Mead Reference Unit, that information is isolated. That information is for them only and cannot be accessed by others. And those are the things that have been put in place within the health sector to be able to deal with these emerging issues. We also have within the private and public health sectors some laboratories. For example, the Best dos Santos Public Health Laboratory, that is within the Ministry of Health and Wellness, under the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And also there's one at the QAH. There are some in the private sector. You also have X-ray and EKG, ECG clinics and so on. So there's a lot of information that is circulating in terms of Barbadian patients and the need for people to be able to access this information. So the critical thing here really is to have the ability to limit access, but to share when necessary, the ability to isolate as required, and especially operating within the context of a small island developing state. When you're in a small country where everyone knows the other, confidentiality and the treatment, how you treat the information, becomes even more important than if you were in a much larger country, much larger society, although it is still important in that regard. And one of the things that I would like to say here now, and I'm happy that I discovered a few days ago that when the health information system was being developed here in Barbados, that a lot of work went into that project in terms of a consultancy and so on to look at all the issues surrounding the implementation of that project. And back in 2014, there was a consultancy that was done by Professor Eddie Ventos. I think he's a St. Lucian academic and lawyer. And it was a comprehensive document that was prepared in conjunction with staff of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And in that document, it was recognized that there were a number of areas that would require legislative amendments as we seek to go on the path of digitizing our healthcare system. And even those legislative amendments have not been made, I'm happy to say that that project was conceptualized and that project was executed based on those recommendations. And so there are built-in measures to deal with the issues raised by that team in order to safeguard the access to patient information in this country. And the entire thing is based on the premise that the information belongs to the individual, to the patient. Yep. That is what it is. But we depend on persons to be able to allow us to share some of that information to the benefit of themselves, the patients, and also to the nation. Because if we did not have the health information system, we would not have been in a position to be able to plan properly based on evidence-based research. We would not have been able to isolate where we have to isolate in terms of disease like NCDs, for example, and the impact on the economy, the impact on the society. and to be able to target, to be able to plan, to be able to budget, to be able to counter certain threats. All of those things required the use of the information that is gathered through the health information system. And of course, we must try to maintain the integrity of that system at all times. But there are a couple of things that I also would like to mention here in this, as we have this debate. We can legislate things, and I like to say that all the time because it is true. We can legislate. We can even hold people accountable. But to me, the one thing that holds all of this together, and without it, this is the do or die thing that must be present at all times, and it is confidentiality. And we cannot legislate confidentiality. And that, for me, is perhaps the weakest link in the chain, in the sense that even with confidentiality, you're depending on people to be able to do the right thing and to follow all of the regulations that you have in place. And I'm not saying for one moment that we do not have confidentiality within our system. I'm not saying that. But I can share with you a report that I read. I believe it is from the United States, some research that was conducted which indicated that confidentiality was an issue in all 20 of the hospitals that were studied or investigated. And this confidentiality sometimes is not deliberate. It, for example, could be doctors or nurses speaking about a patient within a ward and oblivious to the fact that there are others around, including visitors. It could be, for example, a situation where someone who is at a computer terminal where there's sensitive information and the person walks away from that terminal for a longer period of time perhaps than they had intended to, and leaving the terminal open. It is some small little things like that that can create issues of confidentiality. And so I think that part of this bill, or subsidiary legislation or regulation, sorry, the training component, training is absolutely necessary. I believe that it is not enough for persons, for example, to sign the Official Secrets Act. That is not going to embed in them the need for secrecy and confidentiality. I think we need to have some training seminars annually or on an ongoing basis, and especially when persons are coming into the medical profession and other professions, there should be training to sensitize workers, sensitize persons to the need and the requirement for confidentiality. I think that that is absolutely necessary. The other thing about the bill, and I was looking at one or two other data protection bills, I was checking the Europeans, for example, and I recognized that there was a period that they had allocated to make the transition from what existed before the thing to the present. And I'm sure that that is something that we would be considering as well. But even though I stated the fact that we have put measures, both organizational and technical matters in place to deal with how we deal with our health information system, that is the public system. We don't have that leverage with the private healthcare system. And so, this bill, and I believe a bill that I will need to bring to this Parliament through Cabinet at some point in time in the near future, one dealing specifically with healthcare, that would then give us the authority to be able to deal and to account for what goes on as well within the private sector in terms of medical records. So I would want certainly to associate with what this bill is intended to do, and I would also want to give the assurance to all Barbadians that we have a health information system in this country where the greatest effort is given towards the protection of the data and the level of professionalism and confidentiality of the persons who are the custodians of that data. So that with this in mind, we are going to be going further in terms of how we treat to the provision of health care in Barbados, and especially at the primary level, where we are going to be doing a few more things. For example, we are moving in a direction where in the very near future that consultants at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital would be able to read X-rays from, let's say, Winston Scott or the St. John, the polyclinic at the David Thompson Health and Social Services Complex, so that they can give advice to the physicians who are on duty at those locations without the patients having to go to receive that kind of information or advice or treatment. And all of this is part of the package of delivering primary health care to all. And so we would certainly be depending on the use of data and the fact that persons know that we are using their data for the good of the patients themselves. And I will end by commending once again all those persons who have worked on this bill. I think it is something that is important for the country. I believe that we are probably one of the few countries within the region to be going in this direction, and I certainly give it my fullest support. I am obliged.
Great. Member for Christchurch Central.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Good morning, sir.
I rise to lend support to this bill before the Chamber, and it speaks to a very, very important subject matter, sir, that as Barbadians, and certainly as a young Barbadian, I recall, sir, not so long ago, being told what was at school about Barbados' progress to going into the 21st century. And how, sir, the 21st century indeed was going to be the information age. And so as we bring this legislation, sir, to this chamber in 2019, Barbados, in a sense, sir, we would have made significant strides over the years, but we have not done so in as much a cohesive manner with respect to data and information, sir. And this bill seeks to put some greater structure with respect to persons and individuals in terms of the treatment of their data. But, sir, one of the very, very, very important things that Barbadians must come to realize is that we operate in a global environment, sir. And one of the most interesting things about global development is that which one seeks to protect, sir, that which one deems to be of value, sir, is what citizens sometimes, sir, seem not to quite understand. Because inasmuch as we are operating in a global environment, sir, and certainly as we want to modernize and digitize, and in a sense, sir, I'm following from the remarks of the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown in terms of the improvement of the delivery of public services, and in his case, health care. Data protection, sir, is a very, very, very serious matter, because it really does place at the forefront the fact, sir, that all of your personal data, sir, should be valuable to you. And I also understand, sir, that we operate in an environment, sir, where social media and how persons engaged in social media could, in a sense, sir, undo all that which we are seeking to give protection to based on how persons engage with certain social media platforms. And the truth is, sir, that here, this is an area now, sir, where in the 21st century, how Barbadians and how Barbados treats to data and information, sir, in a sense will determine how competitive we will be in this global environment. Now, sir, as we know, almost everybody in Barbados has a cell phone these days, and you will go on Google Play, sir, or the App Store, and you will download apps, sir, and you will put your information in there, sir. And most often than not, sir, we will turn on the location in our phones. The apps are collecting data on us, sir. When we go on websites, we are given certain ads based on our profiles, sir. And the reality is that we operate in an age, sir, where all of these data points are shown to us based on algorithms, sir, that in a sense represents, on the one hand, some of the interests, the likes, all of these things, sir, which are critical. But, sir, citizens sometimes do things out of sometimes desperation, and I know the honourable member for the city would have spoken to it. I certainly would have spoken to it, sir, in terms of members, certainly in this chamber, our profiles on social media being duplicated, and seemingly in the social space, sir, asking citizens for information. And the truth is, sir, what we have to do now is to sensitize the citizen as to the risks that not just data, but identity theft, sir, what that can do in an environment such as this. And I speak in that context, sir, because as part of what we have to do now, not just as it relates to data protection, and in a different space and a different time, sir, we will perhaps be discussing freedom of information, but that too is related to this. But identity theft, sir, in the 21st century is a real and present danger. That does not mean, sir, that we disengage from the technology. It means that our use of the technology and how we understand the use of the technology is absolutely paramount. Sir, whether it's your credit card, and whether you purchase through an app, whether you purchase through a website, sir, these are risks that are inherent with doing business, so to speak, sir, in a digital space. However, sir, the way that citizens control and determine who has access to their information and for what purpose, sir, is absolutely critical. And even from the perspective, sir, as government, we are in a process now, sir, of making sure that our policy making is driven by evidence, is driven by a culture of data, because, sir, oftentimes things are represented to us, sir, out of emotion. And when one looks at the data, more often than not, sir, there's a disparity between what is said to you and what the data represents. Now, sir, these are decisions now that as a government and as a country we must seek to ensure that we pursue a path that allows for that evidence-based decision-making to take root as part of the policy-making framework of the country. But in the context, sir, of data protection, and I know that my colleague for St. Michael South Central, as we embark on the census of 2020, that as enumerators go into the field, sir, and I'm just conscious that we are talking about data protection. Every 10 years, sir, we conduct a census, and we go and ask every resident, not Barbados, every resident in Barbados, you know, to make sure that we know who's in Barbados. Not because we want to malicious in your business, sir, and specifically, but decisions, sir, about planning, decisions about how to spend the money, sir, over the next 10 years would be critical, such that we are making policy, sir, from a position of information. Yeah. So when these enumerators go about the country, sir, and some people may interpret it to mean that, well, my data is protected, so I don't have to answer you, and that may very well, sir, be true. But the reality is, sir, that government has to make decisions from data and information. And I want to say from this chamber today, sir, that next year's census, I believe, sir, is going to be a very critical point for this country, sir, in reshaping, sir, the data infrastructure in this country. Because out of that, sir, is where we make decisions now in the interest of the people. Now, sir, I also want to speak very briefly on another element, sir, of data and how we treat to it from the context, sir, of credit reporting. Because this is a critical part, sir, of what makes up, in a sense, protection of your personal data. Because whilst one has the right to know and should have the right to know who's using your data, for what purpose, and to understand, sir, how your behavior could, in a sense, determine from a creditworthiness perspective how financial institutions will be prepared to screen. This is going to be a critical element, sir, as part of our thrust going forward. Barbados, over the last few years, sir, would have been hearing about the many credit downgrades with respect to the government of Barbados under the last administration. And at the moment, sir, under the financial institutions, there's already a credit bureau in operation in Barbados, but going forward, sir, there will be more open and transparent mechanisms with respect to the development of credit scores, not just for businesses, but also for individuals. And so I want to alert the chamber, sir, that within that framework, with respect to data protection, that as persons go about their activities with respect to the payment of their loans, the payment of their rents on time, and all of this, sir, this speaks to your behavior in the context of what makes for good credit. And sir, I must say that it is a very interesting area that has taken root in the last few years, because this determines, sir, in a sense, what interest rates you are charged from certain financial institutions. But within that context, sir, the understanding as to what are the critical factors that drives one's access to credit is also very much a data protection issue. Because one of the challenges, sir, that we would have seen in other jurisdictions is persons not understanding exactly how their behavior would have fit into the various credit scores that they would have received. And therefore, as part of the mechanism, sir, as highlighted in this bill, would be the right for the data subject, the citizen, to be able to inquire of any institution who is using their information, sir, to make decisions as to precisely what and how those decisions impact on the citizen. And it is very fundamental for the citizens of this country, sir, to understand that as Barbados is seeking to move forward, that data protection in the context of not just this bill, but how citizens provided the information, who they provide it to, the protection of their identity, sir, is absolutely important, so that citizens should not, sir, be submitting their information to anybody who probes them on the internet. Because if you provide your information willingly, sir, in an open environment, then whilst there's only so much that, in a sense, sir, the legislation or the state can offer protection, if you are out there, sir, giving everybody that you come into contact with unfettered access to your information. And whilst giving access to information, sir, does not in of itself pose a risk, obviously the misuse of that information is critical. But one has to understand, sir, quite frankly, that the way that you engage either with technology, the way you engage with persons, that there's a level of trust that one automatically assumes that once you download an app or you go to a website or you swipe your card in a store or you go to conduct business anywhere, not just in Barbados, but any part of the world, sir, there's an element of trust that's inherent in that relationship. And this bill seeks to ensure, sir, that the citizen is protected for the most part, assuming, sir, that that level of trust exists as and confidentiality, as the honourable member for the city would have indicated in his presentation. Now, sir, I go back to decision making, because in the 21st century, as government seeks to modernize and digitize the departments, as you know, sir, if you go from one department to the next, just as the Minister of Health would have indicated as happening in the context of the polyclinics, we do not want as government, sir, that if you have to go to 3 or 4 different departments, that you have to provide the same information to 3 or 4 departments. And therefore, as I indicated earlier, sir, how we engage now, sir, with respect to the conduct of the census next year and the integration of our technologies across government, I believe, sir, would provide the citizen, as we have committed, sir, in our manifesto, to making it easier for people to do business with government, that as we move forward, sir, over the next few months over the next year, certainly with the conduct of the 2020 census, that our modernization efforts, sir, within government will seek to make sure that there's a regime within which, sir, a framework within which to share information, so that citizens don't have to keep giving the same information every time they go to different departments. And the reality is, sir, that we looked earlier this year, in part with respect to passports, for example, sir. Every 5 years, you apply for your passport. Your date of birth may change, sir. Your name may change unless you got married, and if that was the case, sir, there would be a protocol in place for that. And so therefore, the submission of that same biometric information each and every time, sir, once you become an adult and your significant features have not changed, the only thing that is required from you, the citizen, sir, really is an updated photograph. And so therefore, it is the system in place to make sure that you don't have to go and repeat, sir, the submission of the same information at every single department over and over and over. And the truth is, sir, all of this speaks to integration of your systems such that once you sign on to a particular part of government, sir, then the protocols with respect to the sharing of your information within government, sir, should be such that you don't have to be giving all of these departments the same information over and over and over. With that, sir, it is also important that as citizens engage government, and as we have sought, sir, to make sure that we do not operate in silos with respect to how persons engage government, that the protocols obviously know to make sure that who has access to your data, sir, is done in a manner that is clear and very, very, very precise, simply because, sir, I do certainly have no need to see anybody's health record. The Minister of Health does not even need to see anybody's health record. It is the professionals in that space who have to make decisions about public health to be able to do so. From his perspective as well, sir, if there's research to be done, and obviously once the data is anonymized, then in that context, sir, we can make policy decisions out of the research, because as you would appreciate, sir, the health and the research that is done within a health context, sir, is absolutely critical with respect to being able to respond with respect to the provision of not just treatment, but understanding, sir, the trajectory and the costs associated with on the impact that particular conditions may have on the country. And so it is within that context, sir, that we understand that the individual's right to protection has to be paramount in that context within government, and certainly in a certain context. Who has access to the information and for how long and what they do with that information, sir, is critical. And I believe, sir, that as we move forward in bringing a more mature approach to government and to governing, that the policies that we seek to roll out with respect to all of this, I think, ought to be published by government, certainly taking the lead with respect to how persons' data are treated. It will mean, sir, that within the various departments and ministries of government, that there will have to be a significant level of education with respect to the treatment of not just the treatment of the data, sir, but the treatment of people. Because sometimes, sir, we may lose sight of the fact that we have to deal with people. And whilst the personal data and the protection of it is absolutely critical, as a government, sir, we want to make sure that we put a framework in place that responds effectively to people. And I think that is absolutely critical, sir, as we move forward. Because it is, once we have that in mind, sir, it means then that the basis on which we engage data protection, the basis on which we provide information, sir, to the public, the basis in how we communicate in terms of what do we do with the data or the information that you give to us. And inform the public consistently, sir, that these are the protocols that are followed within the various departments. Information is provided to the public in a regular fashion, so that persons have confidence that when I give you access, sir, to my information, whether in person or virtually, that I know that I have confidence in the manner in which my information or my data is being treated, so that the trust between government, sir, and the citizen will continue, and that persons will know that the basis on which we are making our decisions, driven by their providing us with not just information, but accurate information, so that we know, sir, that we can do the best with the resources that we have, simply because we have available to us all the information that would be critical to us to make those decisions on behalf of the citizen. And so this bill, sir, and the context in which I raise the issue of evidence-based decision-making, I think is absolutely, absolutely important, sir. And I want to all of us as members of Parliament, and certainly within the portfolios that we hold as ministers in the government, that we go through all of our various departments, sir, and with a sense of reviewing exactly how and who collects data, and make an assessment, sir, as to how are we responding to the needs of the citizens? How is that treatment of the data, is it consistent with the policies that we've articulated? What is required, sir, now to make sure that we do not isolate our departments, isolate our constituents, sir, from as I said, the 21st century, but understanding that we have to engage in the 21st century in a way that is responsible, but allows for our citizens, sir, to take advantage of the myriad of opportunities that presents themselves to Barbados. And I spoke earlier, sir, about competitiveness. And to be competitive, sir, means access to information. And it makes no sense, sir, us giving all of our information to Google and Apple and everybody else outside of Barbados and not providing information, sir, internally in Barbados, allowing the government, sir, to be able to make decisions. Because every day, all know, sir, our citizens are providing information that's leaving Barbados unfettered through the internet, mobile phones, what have you. What we do on social media, sir, all of that is data, sir, data points that helps companies to build algorithms that will determine, sir, which advertisement, when you go online, sir, which ads you see, on which website you visit, sir, and suggestions, all of that. Now, the government of Barbados, sir, is not intended in any way to build algorithms to follow up behind people. But what we need, sir, is the right data and the right information in order to make the best evidence-based policy decisions that we can make as a government. And so, sir, I believe this bill in 2019 will set us on a framework that would allow for the protection of personal data. But with this, sir, we now have to educate our citizens as to, one, what this means for them, but two, what the opportunities are with respect to not just the bill, but in the context of Barbados being competitive, sir, in the 21st century. And as a recent practitioner, sir, I used to make a small living out of mining data. And it is, sir, an area that is, for the most part, sir, untapped in Barbados. It really, really, really is. And that's within government as well as the private sector. Right. And the truth is, sir, is that Barbados can do a much better job all around between the public sector and the private sector with respect to being able to engage in more substantive use of data and information, so that in communicating with the public, sir, and in making decisions as the private sector or as government, that it is driven through data. And I believe, sir, that if we can up our game in that respect, then we will see, sir, not just small businesses growing, but we will see people being able, sir, to take advantage of opportunities outside of Barbados, simply because if we take advantage of the information that's available and we mine it properly, sir, then it means that Barbados truly can become extremely competitive and take advantage of, as I said, the myriad of opportunities that present themselves for the future. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Obliged. Very good. Member for St. Philip West.
St. Philip South.
St. Philip South, sorry. St. Philip South.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on this Data Protection Bill 2019. I am very happy to be associated with St. Philip West, even though I am the representative for St. Philip South.
Very much so.
Because the Honourable member is a good friend of mine. We grew up in Church Village. And so that anything we can share in common with its limits, I am more than happy to do it.
Very much so. Very much so, sir.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the conversation around data protection is one that I'm entirely intrigued by. And I think perhaps it has come at an ethos when I can reflect on a previous life where I had to grapple with change by way of the introduction of technology and the use of data for decision making. And I believe the Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, captured it very well when he made reference to the fact that comprehensive data informs better decisions. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we know that wherever there is change, there will be fear. And so data protection has become extremely, extremely important at a time when more decisions will be made through the collation of data and indeed analysis and prediction will be from the use of that data. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of us are aware that we have a deep responsibility to assuage the fears of people who may have concerns over their personal data. But equally, it should not deter us from being able to go the full distance in making sure that we consider the importance of what data can do in terms of the ease of doing business, but in terms of how we as a government can make decisions. Now, you may recall, Mr. Deputy Speaker, now we existed at a time when there were no electronic devices to help us drive information. And so you had files, you had books, information recorded. And I believe that that information was more easily accessible than it will be today because most devices are password protected. So at least you stand a better chance of knowing who would have tampered with the system or who would have attempted to share critical information by use of technology. Previously, I am not so sure that we were so well protected. Mr. Deputy Speaker, even today in our ministries, when I see files coming to me piled up like that, I squirm. Because I am from an environment where somebody would say, check so-and-so file, and you just log in, and you will go and you can check the information. You can respond. As a matter of fact, I can do it from pulling over in a car park and responding to information. Equally, if I'm in a conversation somewhere and I need to check data, I can do so from an electronic device. One of these things that people constantly call a phone, which I call a handheld device, might have gotten in trouble for saying so, but I still stand firmly by it, because it only becomes a phone when you do this. Other than that, it is one of those things that help you to use data to do the analyses that you need to make informed decisions. Mr. Deputy Speaker, history we should really reflect on. Because once we understand what happened in history, it helps us to get buy-in for what we are hoping to achieve in terms of a data protection bill. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Britain, as we well know, became champions of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, change that had to take place in order for Britain to grow. Equally, manufacturing at the end of the 19th century, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was transformed by the introduction of water and steam and creating greater efficiencies to develop a manufacturing industry globally. And Mr. Speaker, if that was not enough, what came at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, was the introduction of computers and automation. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, if you can track the progress of how we as a people have moved to the extent now that we can become far more efficient in the delivery of services to our people through healthcare delivery, in the delivery of business facilitation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Even, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you were to think of what is required now in Barbados with us as an administration, to be able to pull all the different entities that fall between ministries where there are overlaps, then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is critical for us to be able to accumulate data and to be able to use that data effectively in order for us to make informed decisions in quick time. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we had a fourth revolution that took place, and I think this is the most critical one. This is the reason why we now have to think critically about how we can use data in order to facilitate business and help us to take a country forward. That fourth revolution is something called Industry 4.0, where the very mobile phones and the iPads, etc., are driven by something called 4G, or fourth generation, which is now going to be overtaken by what is called 5G. And 5G, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has already been tried in Britain. I believe there's a company called Worcester Bosch Factory that has been using 5G technology since February, has reported significant progress in terms of efficiency, and that it is predicted that it can increase business potential by some £15 billion by 2025 through the use of fifth-generation technology. So what is it that we have to fear? In my mind, absolutely nothing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, data is critical to our very being, to our very existence. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I speak from a position of knowledge simply because I understand what it was when we had to say to people, you do not need to collect a document anymore, head to the airport, just make sure you have your passport. But were we not able to use data to drive that and all the algorithms that you had in the background that took the complexity of an industry and simplify it in a manner where you showed up anywhere in the world without a document, all you need is a passport and you can travel. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can do nothing other than support what is before us in terms of the way, one, we're treating to the ease of doing business, two, the way we can use data to drive business decisions so that companies, big and small, all of our MSMEs right across Barbados will benefit tremendously through the proper use of data. And you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have had several conversations since becoming a cabinet minister. And one of the things that I am appalled about is the fact that throughout those conversations, we don't have the supporting data to even consider what is being discussed in a very dispassionate way. And so when you ask for information, oftentimes you're being told so-and-so does not have financial information. So you can't really do anything but operate on the basis of emotion. Your decisions as a government to transition a country from where it was in terms of the lustrum that we went through over the last 10 years, to take us to a point where all Barbadians can feel comfortable, certainly knowing that the government is doing what is necessary to build this country, bring back capacity to Barbados. You can do that, sir. You cannot achieve it without proper data collection. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will be one of the first to put my hand in the air and say, fear not. Your information is more secure now than it would have been where somebody, a watchman, any other person can sneak into a room, take up a book, photocopy it, tear out a leaf, and move with it. So the fear that people have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is fear driven only by fear. And that is the first thing that we need to understand, that whenever we bring about change, there's the fear. I recall my little daughter, when I gave her her first laptop after doing very well in the 11 plus. And back then, these things were not as popular as they are now. And she took that thing and started to go through it, and I was scared. I was like, well, she's going to cause this thing to crash, and I'm going to have to go again. And my daughter took the thing and bamboozled the thing in Barbadian parlance, and I did in awe, wondering how she know all these things about the technology. This is where we are, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Every child born today can take any piece of technology and will have no fear, absolutely none, and trying to work with that technology to be able to do things that us adults will be cautious about. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, whilst I do understand to some extent that we need to control children's activity and we need to monitor sites and stuff that children go on, I have absolutely no fear in terms of the use of people's data in order for us to become more efficient, but for us to do critical analysis in order that informed decisions can be made in Barbados. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am wondering how many people are going to run away from 5G. I'm sure everybody is probably waiting to say, well, look, I want to be part of this. All of us now who are turned on by technology will be happy for 5G technology. And when I say turn on, I don't mean the sites that some of us go to where we see other entertainment. I am talking about turn on in terms of doing business in a faster way and being able to analyze information quickly. And this is where we have been lacking for a long time. So I urge everyone, every Barbadian particularly, to be more than willing to provide information. I remember when PayPal was set up, and I had to get a PayPal account. And the only thing they didn't ask me is when I plan to get divorced. That's the reality of it. You know, they wanted to know everything about your personal life.
You didn't share it, though. You didn't share it, that one.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm glad that there wasn't a checkbox. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the point that I'm trying to make, which is the bigger point, is that we willingly provide information to external sources. And we do that simply because we want to get past the block that will be in the way so that we can access the technology and be part of the efficiency. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you think of healthcare, and I thought that the Honourable Minister captured it very well, that if you were moving from the hospital to a polyclinic, or any one of the polyclinics around the island, but even to a private medical practitioner, because we have some that I consider to be hospitals as well, providing clinical service. If you consider what you can get at Sandy Crest, for example, or one of those entities in terms of service, that data should also be readily available. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will not sit here today until I also speak about my findings in the Ministry of Agriculture and my vision for where agriculture should be in terms of the use of data and the use of technology. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've been at this for a long time. It is not one of the happiest moments in my life, to tell the very honest truth, in terms of being able to get things done. But again, it speaks to what the system is. But we have something called sanitary and phytosanitary legislation that we have to work with to bring to this country, where you have to capture information in terms of animal diseases, in terms of what is going to be imported into the country with plants, etc. All different types of pests. That is information that we have to collect, and that is information that should be readily available for quarantine purposes. It is information that should be available to all citizens, so that when people want to make decisions, they're able to go and check. If you think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, about the new industry that is about to evolve in Barbados in terms of medicinal cannabis, and I did a site visit in Jamaica, And the type of IT platform that you're going to need reminds me of where we started in the airline industry and the travel trade, where you had various types of software that you can choose from, but at the end of the day, it must be properly monitored and everybody must participate in terms of having that type of automation in order to participate. And think of Barbados, where every field must be monitored. We must have data. We must be able to capture that information. We are talking about strain development in cannabis, information that is going to be critical. And so, to some extent, when you're saying these things now, to my mind, I am feeling like the Honourable Member for Christchurch, for St. Michael South, when he constantly refrains that we are having yesterday's conversation today. Because these are things that should have been done long ago. And it blows your mind to think of the amount of information we are going to need to build a medicinal cannabis industry in Barbados. It is huge. I do agree, though, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that it produced tremendous opportunities for various people, especially young people, in building out businesses to provide IT services and to capture data so that we can then use that central government to determine what the industry is doing for us in terms of GDP. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if there's a moment in my life that I can stand in this honorable chamber and say we are doing something that all Barbadians should be proud of, I must tip my hat to the honorable member for St. George South, and indeed the member, Minister for Ministry of Information and Smart Technology, Senator the Honourable K. McConney as well, for this piece of work that has been done. I think that we have, in a broad way, made a huge leap forward in being able to bring yesterday's conversation to closure and to be able then to make steps towards taking Barbados to the next level. And so on the basis of that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to give this bill my full support, and I want to commend all those who work with it, not just the ministers, but every single person who worked with them and bringing it to this honourable chamber. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Very well. Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I want to pick up from where the Honourable Member for St. Philip South left off. Every time that we come to this chamber and we have to debate bills such as this, it reminds me time and time again of a lack of foresight on the previous administration. We are in a technological age, and we find ourselves having in 2019 to discuss data protection, which if you are living and not sleeping, you would know is as important as protecting your borders, as protecting your health, as protecting anything else. Because in this age of information, if you're looking and seeing what's happening around the world, you have instances of people hacking things, changing information, stealing people's identities, taking information and putting it out in the public domain, twisting it, all sorts of things. And I mean, for us to be here having to do this today, I'm happy that we've had the foresight to get it done. But I'm also very disappointed that this would not have been done a while ago. In fact, since around 2008, this should have been done. You know, but here we are. Okay. And so, for me, it's really about getting the Barbadian public to understand that although these things may not seem as important as some of the other things that people will talk about on the streets, you are as exposed as any other member of the human race today with data being collected on yourself at various points from various entities. And that the world is not the same world that it was, let's say, 20, 25 years ago. Neither is Barbados. And I'll give you a classic example for those of us in here with simple things like Facebook accounts and all these other things where you have data on it. Because you have to answer certain things if you're going to get an account. But a person can hack into your account and put things out there that have absolutely nothing to do with you, that you don't even know what it's about. But it goes into the public domain, and all of a sudden, because of how the world is, it is the gospel truth because it is on the internet. And so you have to be very, very, very careful as to how we treat to certain aspects of people's personal data, business data, and data in general. And so I think this bill is very timely, and like I said, I'm not one who's going to be taking up a lot of time with it, but I'm a very practical man. The time has come where Barbados must understand that it does not stand alone outside of the world, and that once that data is placed on the World Wide Web, so to speak, people all over the planet have access to it. And it would be, and it could be very possible, and I always say to people when I get a chance, anytime at all that you see certain things in Hollywood movies, you can believe that it is coming. There was a time when, for instance, you talk about lasers, we would watch those things as children and we would decide among ourselves, this is a bunch of nonsense. This would never happen. Today, we are in a place where you're using lasers for all sorts of things. Surgical operations, glass, all sorts of things. The same thing with data. You watch a movie and you see where people's identities are changed. Joseph Adderley becomes John King. John King becomes somebody else. They're changing them all the time. This person is accused of something, and all the data is on the net that says, yes, he was a postman or whatever it is. You have to be extremely careful as to how we treat those things. And a lot of the members spoke about, even in terms of health, you know, and it's unfortunate that we still live in a time where people still believe that if you have a condition, be it HIV, AIDS, be it whatever else, that there's some sort of shame to it. We don't treat the having cancer the same way. But the point is that the information is personal, and it should be kept amongst the practitioners. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, neither you nor I have any control over the minds of other people. And you cannot vouch for whoever comes into civil service, police force, customs, wherever it is, you can't. Unless you're going to be having psychological testing on every single person that comes into that space. That, at this particular point, is not part and parcel of what we do, but it may be something we need to look at going forward. Because the persons, again, who are going to be dealing and treating to that data also have to be persons of ethics. Yeah. Persons of good standing. Because even if you put all the protections in place, the person who has access to it still has the access to do with it whatever they want at any particular point in time. And so that therefore when we talk about getting the protections in place, you also have to, as a good friend of mine would say, ask the question, who will guard the guards? Yeah. Who will guard the guards? And so I just want to commend the ministers who also saw it fit to bring this at this particular time, because as we go forward and you look at our younger people coming along, we call them the millennials and all these other fancy terms, but these young persons are driven by information. They are driven by access to doing things in cyberspace. And so even though we talk about having files and all of these other things inside offices, that too may become a thing of the past as we go forward. And so putting the protections in place so that people can feel comfortable knowing that in order for you to have access to these things, there are certain mechanisms in place that keeps out who you don't want in. Then I think this can only be seen as a step forward. And again, I have to say, you know, there's a sign that says where there's no vision, the people perish. I think the people of Barbados have perished for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it is about time that they begin to have some vision. Some people with some vision to take them to another place, to a better place. And I want to commend the Honourable Minister for St. George South and the Honourable Senator K. McConney for bringing this.
But before you sit, though, I want to highlight something that I saw on Saturday night. The Red Boys. How do you Red Boys use data to merge their music into one happy blend?
Correct.
I thought that you could use the opportunity today to highlight how music is changing and how the data is helping
Thank you.
musicians.
I can. I'll give you a classic example. Some years ago, I recorded a song with some very famous jazz artists. And I was nowhere near them. I did my recording of it here in Barbados. And that data was transferred to somewhere else.
Yeah.
And when you have the final product, there you have it. You know, so when you have things like, you have simple things like that, even in the music industry, even the protection of that data is important. Because what you can find is that you can have a recording that is due for release in November of 2021, but it's finished now in 2019. And if it isn't protected, that can be taken, reproduced, and put out there. People make money off of it long before the artist even gets a chance.
Exactly.
And so even in terms of that, the protection of that type of data, this bill is really going to be extremely important. And thank you, Deputy Speaker, for that, because oftentimes when people think of data, they think of it only in terms of personal data or data on a business thing. But no one would probably think of music as being data, the waves, but it is. And so I thank you, sir. And with that, I am obliged to you.
Thank you. Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, sir, Mr. Deputy
Deputy
Speaker,
Speaker.
I rise to give my support to this data protection bill before the House today, which, in my view, has been long overdue. Perhaps it has taken some time in coming in relation to this new administration, but we believe in whatever we do it properly. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. George South, who has piloted this bill, and the Minister of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, as well as the Honourable Minister responsible for Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, who sits in the other place. This legislation has certainly been needed for some time now. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I speak as someone coming out of the private sector, and namely banking institutions, where information is required from time to time as you go to, let's say, do things like open an account, we could do a loan, a mortgage, anything of the sort. And I know for a fact, credit card as well, I know for a fact that in most cases, persons have reluctance in providing information required. I know for a fact as well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that persons like myself who from time to time, having worked in the, not just in the banking industry, but in the retail sector before that, as you required or as you requested information from persons, you had a very difficult time in getting that information, as what used to happen, as a matter of fact, and as you sought to get that information from the customers or the clients, as you would call them, the client would also be asking you questions too. What you want this for? You sure nobody else ain't gonna see this? You know, these were the type of questions that you were asked as a person serving the general public in those institutions from time to time. Because people have, they're skeptical, very much so skeptical about giving information, personal information, but as far as as those institutions, and particularly the banking sector is concerned, in terms of wanting that information to make informed decisions, it is also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the aspect of it of knowing your customer. Knowing your customer, and we would have discussed this at some point in time when we had another bill within this House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and persons from time to time, as I would have said, do not want to share, but they need to be given the comfort in knowing that the information shared remains exactly where it has been given, unless otherwise authorized to do so to another institution for one reason or the other, right? And that is very, very important. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I have observed from time to time, and perhaps the practice is less so now, where information was given on and stored on cards. A card where you would write up the information about a person, and then when you file that card, now that card is filed in a filing cabinet in alphabetical order and all of that. And I could understand why people would be uneasy in giving that sort of information, because I can have access to a filing cabinet, pull that, and you see it sometimes, you used to see it on the movies. You used to see it on the movies. Pull that card, for instance, with some person's health information on it, as the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown would refer to from time to time. You pull that card, in 2 seconds or 3 seconds you photocopy it, replace it, and you walk out of a building or an institution with some person's information in your pocket. And then we hear stuff like drop off the truck and all of this. But I am glad that we are moving into the age, we have moved significantly into the age of technology, where this information now is being stored on computers and so on. And you also, in some instances, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for instance, some person like myself and all of us would have perhaps experienced this from time to time, even in a campaign. You set up your campaign office, you have the data of your constituents stored there on your computers, but we also know that there's something that you do. You have an external hard drive which is removed, which you can keep the data on and actually travel with it, so that if some person maliciously breaks into your office, that data still remains in your possession, and it is still covered. And these are some of the things that are very important and mean something to persons. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, at the ministry, in the ministry in which I serve at the moment, there's some problems that you would perhaps know of. You have persons from time to time doing their various driver's licenses and so on, and being required to travel from all over Barbados into one location just to do the simplest of tasks. From time to time, renew your license. You know, you come to pay for tests or whatever the case may be. And the information, we have got to get with it, Mr. Speaker, that persons can now sit, because of the availability of that data, sit at home and do those simple tasks, not requiring persons to leave St. Lucie, to leave Checker Hall, to leave Mount Gay, to travel up to the Pine to do something as simple as paying for a driver's test or paying for a driver's license. That you have the ability, because of the data and the availability of it online, so that persons can actually just see what concerns them as well.
Right.
Right? That is important, because you must have the protections in there, so that as you go, I cannot access the information of the Honourable Member for Christchurch West or the Honourable Member for Christchurch East. You know, there's that protection and those walls that, as much as you possibly can. And I am happy for this piece of legislation today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that seeks to protect not only just you get data, but seeks to protect that data. And I want to also say as well, as I mentioned earlier, when I look around, for instance, in one, there's a particular government institution, and I know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this administration plans and has a program in place to digitize information that presently exists on the same cards and pieces of paper and in folders and so on that fire can easily destroy and all of that. And I have seen, as I walk through some institutions where this information is there, like you can actually look through the glass and see it and things like that. And this government is indeed moving and must indeed continue to move swiftly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to get persons' information that may particularly lie in government departments now be lying around in a folder or on a piece of card somewhere, to get this information digitized, because if it's not, it's still easily accessible. And I take the point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, ways mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. Philip West,
Right.
that at the end of the day, it rests with the person who has access to data. Now, if you have data in a file folder, a manila file folder, whether it is manila file folder 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 14, however size it comes in, if you have that data available there that persons can just access, it becomes a big concern to the person who has given that data in. But once, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government has put things in place and is moving to get this data out of those folders and into a system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, into a system that it can be covered by this legislation. Because, and persons as a result, Mr. Deputy Speaker, would feel more comfortable, because it's about the people feeling comfortable with their information as well. I heard, Mr. Deputy Speaker, an example drawn by the Honourable Member for St. Michael South last week, when his data was taken and some person used up everything on his cards. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have had the experience when I traveled sometime about 10, 15 years ago, when I used my credit card at a location, comfortable and everything went well, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I realized one day in just checking my bank statement, my credit card statement, that for about 5 to 6 months at a particular time, a transaction for $30 US was going through all the time at a place that I'd never been. I didn't know, and we made a joke of it. My colleagues at the time made a joke of it as to what I was doing in that place, but I never known the place, don't even know where it is.
Right.
Pardon?
You're speaking to the chair.
You know, yes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
You're speaking to the chair. You're not supposed to hear size. Right?
You know? So the data was out there, and it was used, and this is the thing that happens as we understand this as a government, and especially in speaking to the minister, the Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology. She has a good grasp on what is possible and what is required in order for persons to feel that comfort level in giving data, because it is not just bringing or having law or legislation to protect, but the systems themselves, the systems that we utilize within this administration across the government sector and even in the private sector, because it must also happen in the private sector as well. Because the laws are meant to govern an entire country, not one sector and not the next. It must happen within the private sector as well. That persons must have that level of comfort. And the systems must be in place. Not only just to have a law, but the systems must be in place to ensure that what the law seeks to achieve, that it happens. And I would want to see from time to time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where we can have audits, of systems, where from various entities and institutions across this country, where we can go in and check to make sure that what is being done and where people's information is being kept is what is desired. Because if we have all the laws if we put all these laws, the law in place, and still the systems that are required, people are flippant about it, then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will still lose the battle in this regard, right? And that is one of the things that I want to see. Digitization as quickly as possible within government, but we should also make it mandatory that persons in the private sector, in the business houses and so on as well, any place at all that takes information from people, must have the requisite systems in place to get that information into a particular area of safekeeping, so that people's information is not compromised or is not at risk, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That is very, very important. And that is why I can wholeheartedly support this legislation today, because this government has moved and continues to move in all areas to bring Barbados up to, and I heard the Honourable Member for St. Philip South talk about yesterday's conversation today, you know, and that is a serious thing as far as information is concerned. But this government is moving swiftly to correct and to deal with all those things to get Barbados on par, up to scratch, up to date with what is required or what is happening or has been happening in the region and in the international arena for some time now. And therefore we must commend the government for doing this. We commend the Honourable Minister member for St. George South and the Honourable Minister that sits in another place for bringing this piece of legislation to Parliament today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so that Barbados can move forward and step even further into the 21st century and beyond. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm obliged to you. But before, I thought that the member for St. Philip West made a very valid point just now. St. Philip West, St. Philip West this time, when he said that in 2006 we were looking at legislation, especially when you came after him and talked about the driver's license. We were looking at the demerit point system as it relates to driver's license. Where are we on this? Because, you know, it is very helpful for the police. The person driving a lot of infringement, continue driving for a whole year, 2 years, and the police still turn up on the scene without knowing where the driver's license are. So this is where we are going. And you're right that 2007 we were moving towards a platform of data protection. Member for, I'm very glad the Attorney General wants to speak on this.
It's unusual that the Speaker speaks. The Speaker normally just rules.
A different type of speaker.
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, from almost as long as the new digital age commenced, Barbados has been grappling in one way or another with the things that come along with it. In some instances, we've been ahead of the game. In other instances, we've dragged a little. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. One of the challenges with small states is our ability to absorb new technology and to get it right the first time. And mindful always that you can't reinvent the wheel, I am always happy, sir, when we have the opportunity to watch emerging trends.
Yes.
And when once we can settle in our minds that those emerging trends are well established, here to stay, then in my view, small states like Barbados can take the risk of adopting the stances that those emerging trends have dictated. Mr. Speaker, a long time ago, had the great honor of chairing a hemispheric committee on electronic commerce. And that International Committee on Electronic Commerce was one of the committees of the now defunct FTAA, Free Trade Area of the Americas. And sir, as one of the international experts on e-commerce, I was part and parcel, I suppose, of not just watching e-commerce develop, but in some small way trying to see how it fit in the countries of the hemisphere and how we can use them to our mutual advantage. But one of the things that came very quickly to mind, sir, was the fact that it is almost impossible for administrators and managers and policymakers to keep in step with the technological changes. In those days, sir, Amazon was a nascent company that had not made a cent. Amazon had not made a cent. And everybody understood the potential of Amazon and the things that it was doing, but several times there was the fear that it would go broke. We were debating whether we should heavily regulate e-commerce or whether we should just let it grow. Today, sir, we're talking about whether we should try to regulate Facebook and social media or whether we should allow them to grow and find their own level. When we started thinking about e-commerce and the whole internet, I don't think that if I can say for sure, that in the context of Barbados, we did not think that the internet would be easily used by people to distribute pornography involving school children. But it is something that we've had to come face to face with in our country. What does all of this tell us, sir? It tells us that technology grows at an exponential rate. It tells us that small states like Barbados, try as they might, they will always have a difficulty in staying ahead of the curve. And it also tells us, sir, that sometimes that's not a bad thing. We need to see the direction that other people are going in internationally before we stake a claim for ourselves. It has always been evident that data protection is important and would be important in this digital media. But it represents a philosophical change for Barbados because for as long as we have known ourselves, our jurisprudence has never recognized a right to privacy. I suspect that that's likely to be taken a little strangely by the average listener to the proceedings in this chambers. Because if there's one thing that we know about Barbadians is that they are intensely private.
True.
There's nothing worse than a malicious neighbor. And we will go to any length to keep our business behind our doors. But notwithstanding that urge and drive for privacy, it is not and has never been recognized in the law.
You're using malicious as colloquial?
I'm using malicious in the colloquial sense, sir.
Oh.
Malicious neighbors. But and perhaps there was no malice, but sometimes malice can be imputed in that kind of inquisitive behavior. But sir, our society has managed well, our post-independent society has managed well, without having any constitutionally enshrined right to privacy. So much so that there's never any doubt that an individual could not get another person's medical records. There has never been any doubt that an individual could not access a third party's pharmacy records. I don't know why we would want to check the dental records, but equally there's never been any doubt that you couldn't get dental records. There were some things always that were seen as being in the public domain, though. Title deeds, for example. Even copies of wills, except for the one remarkable case in recent history where somehow or another the public record of a former Prime Minister's will was felt best hidden from human sight. But other than that glaring and inexcusable anomaly, we've always accepted, sir, that certain things were within the public domain and were accessible. But, sir, the world inexorably changes. And especially operating in a digital generation where material, both good and harmful, can be disseminated across the globe to be used in nefarious ways to cause you harm, to expose your inner being almost. It is not a surprise that internationally somebody had to bell this proverbial cat and try to put systems in place to recognize that a person's personal data must be protected by law. In this instance, sir, the EU has been the country that has leaped ahead And taking the benefit of numbers and size of markets and so on, they've been able to establish a data protection regime which Barbados has taken a decision would meet our needs, and we have therefore, in almost all important aspects, taken our lead from the EU in this position. Now, sir, no doubt, whenever you stake a position, especially as it relates to technology, there's going to be a cost to it. And we've had to look at the question of whether protecting data meets cost-benefit analysis. But it does. And I think that the average person's experience with social media today causes us all to scream out that our privacy can be at risk, and we need to take every possible step to restrain that. Now, perhaps the most obvious ones would be banking information. The previous speaker spoke about an instance when his credit cards and his bank account were used, and that when he thought he had money to spend, he didn't. And that is directly related to data privacy, sir, because his data, the information in relation to his credit cards and his accounts, could not have been accessible in the internet age if his data had been adequately protected. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a repeat in recent times of the so-called scammers who are coming to Barbados and raiding people's bank accounts using devices. Now, there's a level of sophistication for that, or that attaches to it. But again, the risk for them is minuscule in relation to the benefit. Mr. Speaker, even after the highly publicized incident of a few weeks ago, there was yet another incident in Barbados where individuals were taken into custody for doing exactly the same thing. But let's do the math, sir. When you fly 4 individuals from South America up through perhaps Panama into Barbados, and you put them in hotels, and you rent a vehicle, and you accommodate them over a matter of days, so they can go and literally break into your account and steal your money, and then they have to try to get it out. And there's, of course, the risk that somebody might get caught, so legal fees and other costs come into play. They've worked out, sir, that the money that they stand to be able to get away with far exceeds the cost of them engaging in that business. But it's, again, about protecting people's data and thereby protecting their hard-earned resources. Mr. Speaker, small businesses will find that there are going to be some issues arising, but I believe that the administrative and legislative arrangements will accommodate that. Small businesses in Barbados, a family-owned business in Barbados, is not going to be too different to a family-owned business in the EU. A person who runs an individual dental practice has to have data control possibilities, or has to meet data control requirements in the EU. And he or she will run a small enterprise in the same way that a Barbadian will run a small enterprise. But it's all a question of meeting the risk. There's not going to be a requirement for individuals having a small business to go and make investment in all of that technology and the protection that is required if your business doesn't open you up to that risk. But, sir, we have to recognize that the financial and economic might of the EU is being brought to bear in a cross-border way on entities that do business with the EU and that capture EU citizens' data. And if there's no protection offered to that data, whether you're keeping it in Barbados or keeping it in the United States, wherever it is, then there are consequences to flow, and those financial consequences are huge. Now, Barbados can ill afford for its businesses to be shut out of an environment where they're required to capture and keep data of EU citizens, sir. And perhaps the simplest one that comes to mind will be the tourism sector. I think the statistics will still show that the EU represents the largest source of visitors and visitor spend in Barbados. I believe that that's still correct. Well, but I said the UK is still in EU. Brexit hasn't happened yet. So until Brexit takes place, I am treating the EU as including the UK. But I'm only doing it for the purpose of making a point, because the EU, including the UK, represents the largest source of our tourism product, our tourism spend and visitors and so on. Now, in order to successfully do business, tourism business, you have to take bookings from EU partners. And you keep that data. But any sensible businessman will not keep it and dispose of it. Because a person who makes a booking and stays at Colony Club Hotel this year is a ready customer for next year. So the Barbadian enterprise will want to keep that data so that he or she or it can build a database of potential customers and market contacts and so on. And the EU is saying, if you want to do that, you have to guarantee the protection of the data of my citizens. Now, Mr. Speaker, Barbados should be saying the same thing. If you want to do business with Barbadians, which will require you to capture and use the personal data of a Barbadian, then you need to afford to our individuals the protection of that data. Mr. Speaker, it is a rapidly changing world, and technology will often do things and offer protection that the law can only speak about. And I'm not schooled in technology, so I'll avoid those issues. But for us, it is as simple as insisting within our own environment, that our Barbadian citizens' data is to be protected. Now, sir, even as a government, we have to take these things into account. We are speaking about a new ID card, for example, which may have biometric data associated with it. And we're hoping that that new ID card will be able to do a raft of other things, banking, bus travel on buses, post offices, all kinds of government services we're hoping to be able to have on that card, medical data and so on. Now, if we as a government are looking to set up a framework which will see a concentration of citizens' data on a particular platform, available on a particular card, then it is incumbent on us as well to say to the average Barbadian, your data is protected. Everybody in this chamber, sir, sitting in these benches, has faced the polls. Is there any one of us who has not had a constituent say to them, man, I know you know how I vote? And it is almost impossible to get it out of their heads that you know how they vote, because as far as they're concerned, they may have gone into a polling booth, and we've guaranteed them all kinds of physical privacy, and they've cast a vote. But in their mind, it is still possible for any of us to check to see how that vote was cast. And no matter how you try to disabuse them of that notion, sir, some of them go to their graves thinking that we have the capacity to find out how they vote. For the record, sir, we don't. But even if I proclaim it loudly from this desk, sir, there are people who will not believe it. But the point is, even that data is worthy of protection, and they say it with conviction because they don't like the idea that a politician could even remotely be in a position to see if they did or did not exercise their franchise in your favor. No modern Barbados can be expected to function in a digital environment unless we meet the minimum technological standards, but also unless we meet the minimum legal standards. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill, we brought it to Parliament. It was led off in the Senate, and I believe this chamber will recollect that we went immediately to Select Committee, chaired ably by a member of the other place. And the purpose of that Select Committee, sir, was to accept the recommendations now of the people who have to implement it. And I think that that is a laudable thing, Mr. Speaker. It is very easy for us as the executive to set the rules by which the game will be played. It's very easy for us to sit in our offices, advised by public servants, and determine this is what has to be done. But our challenge almost invariably arises, Mr. Speaker, when somebody out there whose bread and butter this constitutes has to take what we pass as a law and make it work. And that is often where the problem lies. And if there's one thing that this administration, as new as it still is, has guaranteed to the people of Barbados, it is that we will consult and consult and consult again. Very good. We had that process, and I believe, sir, that it is a process that has helped to make this bill better. It is a process that we have followed in the Integrity and Public Life Bill, and that's going to be here soon. But it is also a process that we intend to follow on many of the other significant legislative changes that have to be made. We consulted extensively, sir, with the public of Barbados on the new planning legislation, because we recognized, Mr. Speaker, that we were about to change completely the way in which the government as an entity that gives planning opportunities to individuals and development opportunities to individuals, we were changing it completely from what it used to be. And how better to do that, sir, than to engage in a public consultative process with the people who have to use the structure that you set up. And it has worked. And even though we didn't have the opportunity to receive all of the contributions that people have wanted to make, sir, we have said to the people of Barbados that whatever we do is not fixed in stone, and to the extent that from time to time we can make improvements to it, rest assured that this administration will do so. Like all these things, though, we know that it is going to require a lot of public education. Right. There are still pieces of legislation that were passed years ago, and in the absence of sufficient public education, we have not been able to receive the full benefit of it. And I can draw the Chamber's attention, if you'll allow me, sir, to the Employment Rights Act. Right. It was passed, but without sufficient information going to the Barbadian people who need to use it, both employees and employers, there are many gray areas that still exist that do not need to exist. And it's as simple as that. this bill will require that as a government, we put a significant amount of consumer information out there so that the people who have to use it will be able to do so. It isn't everybody who's going to be able to take the bill and send it to their lawyers and their accountants and their IT people and say, come and advise me on how to implement this. They're going to be people who are hairdressers. They're going to be taxi people who collect data, who keep data on all of their customers. They're going to be supermarkets, mini-marts, all kinds of enterprises who will need to be brought into this fold. And the obligation on any government, sir, must never be to pass a law and leave it out there for people to figure out. Can't happen, sir. And therefore, I don't think I need to call on the minister. I don't recollect if he gave that commitment, but I believe that commitment is one that is going to be guaranteed by this administration. Public education, public education, public education.
That's right.
There is a lot, sir. There's a lot that is wasted simply because people have not been informed. There's unnecessary friction between people who use the law and the people who apply the law. That is friction, sir, and waste that we can ill afford. In order for this bill to make to the Barbadian society that are needed, we're going to have to eliminate that friction and waste by ensuring that the commercial sector, the private sector, gets the benefit of the very best cooperation with the government so that Barbados as a whole can benefit. I support this bill. I especially want, Mr. Speaker, to thank the members of the Chief Parliamentary Council's office, also known as the draftsmen, though they're all draftswomen, for the tremendous amount of work that they have done in relation to this bill. If there's one thing that this administration has done, sir, is to put a lot of pressure on public servants. My ministry is no different. But I'm happy to say, sir, that the staff of the Chief Parliamentary Council's office, in this case and in practically every other case, has labored mightily so as to be able to deliver the finest possible standard of work and standard of care in the bills that are brought to this chamber. And I want to publicly thank them for their hard work, and I want to publicly thank them on behalf of all of the ministers who caused me to look like a slave driver without any reward, sir. And with those few words, I support this bill and I'm obliged to you.
God bless you. Member for
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I
Office.
beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2 p.m. this afternoon.
Seconded. Question is that this House be suspended until 2 p.m. Yeah, deal. Yeah. Suspended until 2 p.m. today. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 2 p.m. today.